Hey everyone, and welcome. In this video, I'm going to explain how to use equity buckets to better understand flop strategies. If you're looking to better your understanding of game theory and fundamentals, this is going to be the video for you. First off, we're going to take a look at two examples that will better illustrate how to use equity buckets in flop strategies. We're going to open up Wizard and go to the Study tab. From here, we're going to select two different scenarios from the same positions. First, we open under the gun and call the big blinds. You can use any flop that you're looking to study. For this example, I'm going to use Ace Jack 10 for the first one. And we're going to take a look at the equity buckets for this particular flop. So to find the equity buckets, you're going to go to the Ranges tab. And in the middle here, you'll see a section for equity buckets. To explain what equity buckets are, you can go to the drop down here and click the Help. Equity buckets are essentially hands that are separated by their equity into categories. So we have best hands, good hands, weak hands, and trash hands. Trash hands are going to be any hands that have an equity threshold of 0 to 33%. Weak hands are going to be 33 to 50%. Good hands are going to be 50 to 75%. And best hands are going to be 75 to 100%. So when people are talking about best hands advantage, they're talking about how much equity our range has with a certain category of hands. So our best hands are going to be in that 75 to 100% equity category. Now, how do we use these to help better understand flop strategies? Let's get into the first example. The first thing I like to do when studying a scenario is to look at the two different ranges and how they interact with the board. So we can do that with the Ranges tab. You'll see here that on each side, we have the under the gun position and the big blind position. As the original raiser, we can typically understand that we're going to have a lot of strong hands. Some of these hands are not going to be in big blind's range. Immediately, that draws my attention because this is a flop with high cards. So if under the gun is going to have a strong range of high cards, I'm going to assume that it's going to be the stronger range. We can confirm this by looking into the equity buckets. You can see here that the best hands, if I click here, will display the best hands in the category. And it shows that the under the gun range, in fact, has 39.4% of best hands compared to the big blind's 4.6%. So that's a very small number of best hands for the big blind. And it makes a lot of sense, as I've mentioned before. It does lack a lot of strong combos like aces and kings, ace king, and a lot of ace queen offsuit, as well as ace queen suited. So whenever you have a range that is going to have more strong combinations than another, the solver is going to want to bet at a higher frequency. In this case, it's so drastic that the solver likes to bet the entire range. Now, this isn't only because of the best hands range, but also because of the weak hands and the trash hands. So if we look at the weak hands and trash hands, the under the gun position doesn't really have too many of these combos compared to the big blind. The big blind is going to have a lot of weak hands and trash hands, as we can see here. So in combination with the best hands advantage and the lack of weak and trash hands, we see the solver wants to bet at a high frequency because the entire range is going to interact with this board very well. And instead of trying to balance a really large sizing and a small sizing, it makes more sense to group the strategy into a sizing that the entire range doesn't mind betting. So when we're looking at the strategy, it's often going to be reflected by how the entire range wants to continue. Sometimes there's going to be a hybrid of these categories. Sometimes you'll have some best hands, some good hands, weak hands, and trash hands, and the solver wants to split depending on the board texture because of how the opponent interacts with the board as well. And in this case, because the opponent does not interact with the board well and we interact with the board very well, the solver wants to bet at a high frequency. This is going to change depending on the board texture. So let's use another example. Let's try something around the 7-6-5 range. Now this is going to hit the big blind much better than the previous board of Ace-Jack-10. And we can immediately see that reflected in the strategy of the under the gun position after the big blind checks. You can see the amount that the under the gun position wants to check goes way up. And if we look at the equity buckets, we're going to find the reason why. So here, the amount of good hands and weak hands is increased in the big blind's scenario. Also, the best hands advantage has shrunk significantly. Previously, we saw that on an Ace-Jack-10 board, the best hands advantage was 40 compared to under 5. And now it's only 13 compared to almost 6. So this advantage has shrunk a lot, as well as the fact that the under the gun position is not going to interact with a lot of this board. A lot of our hands are going to be categorized into the good hands category. And whenever you have a good to medium strength hand, if you click here, you can see that it's going to consist of a lot of hands that don't typically want to be betting 3 streets of value. So hands like queens and jacks and tens are great, but the problem is compared to the big blind's strong hands, they're not going to be able to bet, and they're not going to be able to bet large across those 3 streets. So looking at the stronger hands from the big blind, you can see that they're going to have a lot of the straights, they're going to have a lot of the 2 pairs, they're going to have a lot of the sets, whereas under the gun is going to be mixing all of these suited combos around here, while big blind is going to have a lot of these suited combos that interact with the 7-6-5 board here. So this is going to lead to a high frequency of checking for the under the gun. Whenever you have less of a best hands advantage and the overall good hands are high in your range, it's the perfect combination to have a high frequency check in your strategy. So when I'm studying and comparing 2 ranges, I like to use the equity buckets feature to help myself better understand what's going on with the flop strategy. Typically, you'll see a lot of trends with the equity buckets correlating to the range advantage, to the best hands advantage, to all the different categories here that you'll see. They're going to affect your flop strategy. And you can always go back and forth between the strategy and the ranges and the equity buckets to see where the trends lie. And that's one of the most important things that you can do when you're studying using GTO Wizard, is to pull the heuristics out of the strategy so that you can apply them to any other situation that you might find yourself into. So whether it's a single raise pot or if it's a 4-bet pot with the small blind and the big blind, using the equity buckets and the strategy tool, you can come up with an idea of what's going on and why. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see more of this, please like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.